Before we start, make sure to subscribe, because today's story is full of secrets, drama, and royal twists. London, 1872, the season every debutante dreamed of and one girl feared most. Lady Isabella had never imagined that the world she had been born into, draped in silk and gilded halls, could be so merciless. From the moment she stepped into Ashford Manor's grand ballroom, her heart quivered not with excitement, but with the icy weight of expectation. The air was thick with the perfume of roses and the whispered judgments of society, a delicate yet suffocating scent that clung to every polished surface. Tonight, the Duke's family and their assembled peers would not merely dance and toast. They would measure her worth against a singular standard she had yet to meet. Isabella's gown shimmered faintly beneath the chandelier's glow, a cascade of pearl-white silk that should have marked her as radiant. Yet, as she moved through the crowd with careful grace, each curtsy, each demure smile, felt hollow against the relentless murmur that followed her like a shadow. "She has failed already," one noblewoman whispered, her eyes sharp with judgment. How long before they cast her aside? Isabella heard it, though she would never admit the tremor of hurt it brought to her chest. The Duke himself, handsome and composed, lingered at a distance, his posture rigid, a mask of propriety hiding the tension behind his gaze. Their eyes met briefly. He, a man bound by duty and fear of scandal. She, a woman navigating the invisible currents of scrutiny that could either lift her or drown her entirely. The Duke's mother, the formidable Duchess of Ashford, approached with the deliberate precision of a hawk circling prey. Her expression was carved of ice, every gesture a reminder of the family's obsession with lineage and inheritance. She spoke not with malice, though her words carried it like a subtle poison, but with the cold authority of one convinced that the world itself depended upon her judgment. "Lady Isabella," she intoned, her voice velvet over steel, "you must understand that the expectations placed upon you are not mere frivolities. The estate, the title, the legacy, they demand continuation. And yet, in the weeks that have passed, we have seen no promise of such a future." Each word struck with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, cutting away the illusions Isabella had held of welcome and belonging. Isabella's lips pressed into a line of measured composure, her hands folded lightly before her, yet beneath the mask of etiquette her heart hammered against the cage of her ribs. She had imagined the first season as a series of dances and conversations, a stage on which her intelligence and charm could shine. Instead, she had been reduced to a ledger entry, an assessment of fertility and potential heirs, and every whispered criticism chipped away at the foundation of her dignity. The murmurs grew louder, weaving into a tapestry of condemnation. A girl who had married too young, a bride who had not yet fulfilled her duty. The Duke, sensing the tension, took a cautious step forward, his polished boots barely making a sound against the marble floor. "Mother," he said, voice low yet clear, "Isabella has been nothing but gracious and patient. Surely we can allow her more time." There was an edge of pleading in his tone, a subtle betrayal of his own vulnerability, and yet it was immediately met with the Duchess's steely gaze. She tilted her chin as if weighing the gravity of her son's defiance, before responding with deliberate clarity. "Time, my son, is a luxury that this house cannot afford. A duchy without an heir is a future precarious and uncertain. It is not enough to hope or to pray, action must be taken." Isabella's throat tightened. She had known this moment was possible, feared it even, but anticipation had never prepared her for the reality of it. The ballroom, once a place of light and music, now seemed an arena, every chandelier refracting the whispered judgments into sharp, spectral shards. The guests, attuned to the power struggles of the Ashford family, watched silently, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, disdain, and concealed satisfaction. Even the musician's strings seemed to tremble under the weight of tension, as if the air itself had become a participant in her humiliation. The Duke's hands twitched at his sides, a sign of his internal conflict, yet he remained constrained by the invisible chains of protocol and honor. Isabella, though shaken, raised her chin. She would not cry, would not collapse into the despair that threatened to consume her. "I understand," she whispered, voice steady despite the quake of emotion beneath it. Every syllable carried the weight of unspoken grief, the silent acknowledgement that her life at Ashford Manor, as she had imagined it, had come to an abrupt and cruel halt. Within moments, arrangements were made for her departure. Carriages were summoned, the leather wheels echoing against the cobblestones of the courtyard. Isabella, swathed in her finery yet stripped of any sense of agency, stepped into the night. Rain had begun to fall in slow, deliberate drops, softening the edges of the world but not the sharp sting of disgrace. Gas lamps flickered along the streets, casting golden halos around her and reflecting her own fractured reflection back at her. Each splash of the carriage wheels against the wet stones seemed to drum a message into her chest. She had been discarded, a bride cast aside for failing to produce the future demanded by a lineage that measured women and children rather than character. Yet even in that moment of deepest desolation, a quiet flame flickered within her. She would not vanish entirely. She would endure, learn, and grow beyond the confines of Ashford Manor and the narrow definitions of worth thrust upon her. The night wrapped around her like a velvet shroud, carrying her toward a destiny unknown yet brimming with possibility. Somewhere beyond the rain and gaslight, her future waited, quiet, resilient, and entirely her own. And as the carriage rolled onward through London's glistening streets, the whispers of the ballroom fading into the night, Isabella allowed herself a single, tremulous thought. The world may have cast her out, but she had not yet surrendered. Soon they would see that absence can be a form of power, and that even in exile, a heart determined could chart its own course. The wheels of fate turned inexorably, and as she disappeared into the mist, neither she nor the Ashford family could guess what tomorrow might bring, or the quiet, enduring force she carried within her, waiting to return. The moment Isabella stepped from the carriage into the quiet embrace of her new residence, the world seemed to exhale around her, leaving only the fragile cadence of her own heartbeat to measure the distance between past shame and future possibility. She had been stripped of the grand halls, the whispered judgments, and the gleaming chandeliers of Ashford Manor, yet here in this modest countryside estate, there was a freedom she had never known, an emptiness that invited both fear and courage. The walls, unadorned and austere, echoed with silence rather than scorn, and for the first time in weeks she could breathe without the weight of expectation pressing upon her chest. Still, the ache of being discarded lingered, a subtle thrum beneath her ribs that no quiet room could soothe entirely. From the first morning, Isabella immersed herself in purpose, carving out meaning in small, deliberate acts. She opened her doors to orphan children from the nearby village, their laughter a balm to her bruised dignity. Each lesson in reading or sewing, each story shared by the firelight, became a quiet rebellion against the cruel verdict that had cast her aside. In teaching, she discovered a rhythm of life untainted by the relentless gaze of nobility, and in nurturing she found a kind of sovereignty more profound than any title could confer. Yet even as her spirit began to heal, whispers from London traveled faster than any messenger. The same salons that had once condemned her now buzzed with speculation, rumors of Isabella's survival, of her resilience, of her thriving despite exile. Some murmured she had borne children, though none could confirm it, and the suggestion alone stirred the curiosity of those who had once dismissed her as a failure. The Duke, confined within the walls of Ashford Manor, found himself haunted by these whispers. He walked the corridors with measured steps, trying to reconcile the rigid decorum of duty with the restless stirrings in his chest. He had obeyed his mother's command, sanctioned the dismissal, and yet each passing day gnawed at him with the weight of unspoken remorse. A society man, taught to measure propriety and ambition above all else, he now felt the inadequacy of protocol when measured against the quiet truth of Isabella's courage. In his private moments, he imagined her standing in a distant garden, her fingers brushing soil, her eyes lifted to the sky in resolve, and his heart contracted with a longing he dared not name aloud. Isabella, unaware of the Duke's conflicted thoughts, continued to build a life of quiet significance. She cultivated gardens, planted flowers that nodded like tiny sentinels to the rising sun, and tended to the children who had come to rely upon her gentle guidance. In these acts she discovered a rhythm of patience and purpose, a realization that her value was not dictated by lineage but by love, care, and endurance. And yet, in the soft evenings, when the shadows lengthened and the firelight flickered against her walls, she allowed herself to wonder what the Duke might think if he could see her now. Would he recognize the woman he had dismissed as fragile and inadequate, or would the memory of her exile forever cloud his regard? Then came the token, small and unassuming, yet heavy with implication. It arrived on a damp morning, slipped beneath her door in a plain envelope sealed with wax. Inside lay a locket, delicate and wrought in gold, containing a single miniature sketch of her own features, executed with precision and care. There was no signature, no declaration, only a quiet acknowledgement of presence, a reminder that she had not been forgotten entirely. The gesture stirred something within her, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Who could have sent it? And why? Each day that followed, as the sun rose and fell over the countryside, Isabella found herself turning the locket in her hands, imagining the unseen admirer watching, admiring, yet remaining distant. News of Isabella's continued dignity and newfound accomplishments gradually reached Ashford Manor, filtered through servants and distant acquaintances. The court, ever hungry for scandal, noted with surprise that the woman they had discarded now commanded respect without the trappings of wealth or title. The whispers that had once condemned her now held notes of intrigue. "She grows stronger," one remarked. "And yet she smiles through it all. Can it be that she has learned something we could not teach her?" The Duke's ears, attuned to gossip yet reluctant to admit interest, could not ignore the chorus of these murmurs. Each mention of Isabella, each suggestion of her quiet triumph, pricked at the boundaries of his pride and stirred a longing he had not permitted himself to feel. It was during a charitable gathering in the village hall that the Duke first glimpsed Isabella since her exile. He had arrived under the pretense of inspection, a man of duty compelled to witness social welfare in his lands, yet his gaze found her immediately. She moved among the children, offering guidance and laughter, her presence commanding without authority, gentle without weakness. Her eyes, lifted toward the sunlight streaming through the windows, carried the steady light of resilience. And for the first time since she had left Ashford Manor, he saw her not as the object of family expectation, but as a woman of formidable strength and undeniable grace. His breath caught, a whisper of recognition mingling with guilt and desire, emotions he had long suppressed beneath layers of etiquette. As the day waned, Isabella stood by a river, the wind tugging at the edges of her gown, and turned the locket in her hand once more. It was not a call for attention, nor a plea for reunion, it was a quiet emblem of survival, a statement of endurance. And yet, across the distance of estate and social convention, her silent act carried a message that could not be ignored. Somewhere, a man who had once dismissed her might yet understand, might yet recognize the power of what she had cultivated in absence. The locket gleamed in the late sun, a symbol of patience, resolve, and the quiet inevitability of reckoning. The clouds above deepened with the approaching evening, casting a reflective sheen across the water, and Isabella allowed herself a thought that had been forbidden for so long, that her exile, her suffering, and her resilience might one day force the world to see her truth. The Duke, too, was moving through corridors of thought and duty, unaware that every step he took brought him closer to confronting not only her triumph, but the fragile, enduring connection that neither time nor distance could sever. And in that convergence of fate, Isabella felt a stirring of anticipation she had not known in months, a whisper of what was to come, a hint that the chapter of her exile might soon yield to a narrative far greater than mere survival, one that would test the limits of pride, honor, and the unspoken ties of the heart. The moment the Duke arrived at the edge of Isabella's estate, the air seemed to thrum with a tension he could not name, a mixture of anticipation and dread that pressed against his chest like the weight of a storm cloud. Weeks of rumors, whispers, and glimpses had led him here, yet the reality of crossing her threshold filled him with hesitation. Every step along the gravel path echoed his inner turmoil, each crunch of stone underfoot a reminder of the weeks he had spent obeying duty at the expense of what truly mattered. He had come under the guise of inspection, a perfunctory visit to ensure the estate's proper care, but deep in his heart he knew this encounter would demand far more than politeness or protocol. Isabella awaited him in the garden, a space she had cultivated with her own hands, vibrant with blooms that seemed to lean toward the sunlight as if acknowledging her triumph over adversity. Her posture was straight, shoulders squared with quiet authority, yet there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes that betrayed both welcome and caution. She did not rise or curtsy, allowing him the uncomfortable reality that the rules of decorum could not contain the weight of what lay between them. The Duke's eyes swept over her, taking in the subtle changes wrought by months of solitude and self-determination, the steadiness of her gaze, the measured grace of her movements, the air of resilience that clothed her as surely as silk once had. He spoke first, voice low and tentative, yet deliberately formal. "Lady Isabella, it has been far too long." His words faltered, caught between the memory of his compliance with his mother's command and the undeniable stirring of longing that he had not dared to name. Isabella inclined her head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, but remained silent, compelling him to continue, to confront the uncomfortable truths that had grown like vines between them. "I have heard of your work here. The children, the gardens, your life." The sentences hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning, the complement a fragile bridge over the chasm of past grievances. Isabella's voice, measured yet carrying the quiet power of authority earned, finally met his. "I have lived as one must, my lord. Exile is a teacher as relentless as it is patient. And I have learned that one's worth is not measured by the approval of those who cast us aside." There was no bitterness in her tone, only a strength that shimmered beneath the calm surface. The Duke felt a pang of guilt sharper than any rebuke, for it was truth he could not deny. Every moment of her composed grace, every quiet act of resilience, bore testimony to a spirit he had failed to honor, one he had once dismissed with the casual cruelty of obedience. She stepped closer, though the distance between them remained deliberate, measured. In her hand she held a small bundle of letters and sketches, tied together with a faded ribbon. It was the first tangible proof that the life she had led during his absence had not been hollow, that her exile had borne fruit of the heart and not just survival. "I have not asked for your recognition," she said softly, eyes meeting his with unflinching honesty. "But there are truths you must now acknowledge whether you are prepared or not." The words trembled slightly, not with fear but with the weight of inevitability, and the Duke felt the air tighten around his chest as he realized the gravity of her revelation. Carefully she opened the bundle and revealed the evidence of her courage and devotion. Sketches of 2 children, unmistakably his likeness, spirited in posture and expression, their eyes bright with life and intelligence. She had drawn them herself, capturing both their resemblance to him and the unique qualities she had nurtured in their upbringing: curiosity, kindness, and resilience. The Duke's breath caught, a sharp, involuntary intake that betrayed more than propriety could contain. The children were real, tangible proof that Isabella had endured, protected, and loved in his absence. The enormity of her actions, performed without complaint or appeal, struck him with the force of revelation, a quiet reckoning that left him both humbled and captivated. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the late afternoon breeze, the faint chirping of birds settling into the approach of evening. The garden, vibrant and alive, seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the delicate tension suspended between them. Isabella, though composed, allowed herself the smallest sigh, a gentle release of the quiet anticipation that had accumulated in her chest. The Duke, for his part, found his hands clenching at his sides, unsure whether to reach, to retreat, or to confess the tumult of regret, admiration, and desire that roiled within him. Finally he spoke, voice barely above a whisper, yet charged with a gravity that demanded attention. I had no notion that such courage could be contained in one soul, or that such life could have grown unseen." The words trembled, honest and unpolished, shedding the veneer of control he had clung to in Ashford Manor. Isabella's gaze softened slightly, recognizing the sincere awe and vulnerability behind his statement, yet she did not allow the moment to dissolve into indulgence. Her strength had been hard-won, and she would not permit it to be diminished by relief alone. She gestured toward the sketches again, eyes steady, voice resolute. "They are yours as much as they are mine. They have been nourished by care, by love, and by the lessons I could provide in your absence. You may acknowledge them now, or you may continue to adhere to the illusions of propriety, but the truth remains." The weight of her words settled over him, a blend of challenge and invitation, and the Duke felt the intricate web of his pride and obligation unravel in the face of undeniable reality. The children were not abstractions, they were living proof of what had been denied in haste and judgment. The afternoon sun began to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the garden, streaking the path with gold and amber light. Isabella held the sketches close to her heart, a quiet emblem of survival and fidelity, while the Duke remained rooted, absorbing the revelation in silence. The air was charged with anticipation, the balance of power shifting imperceptibly yet irrevocably. Every breath, every heartbeat, carried the weight of potential reconciliation and the promise of the confrontation yet to come with society, with family, and with their own hearts. And as the last rays of sunlight glinted across the leaves and the children's sketches, the Duke realized that the chapter of their estrangement was far from over. There would be questions, there would be scrutiny, and there would be judgments to face, but the undeniable truth, held in Isabella's hands and etched into the very life she had cultivated, had already begun to rewrite the narrative. The quiet power of endurance, love, and unseen devotion hovered between them, a force neither could deny, setting the stage for a reckoning that promised to change everything. The day the Duke returned to Ashford Manor, the air seemed charged with the weight of inevitability, as though the walls themselves had been waiting for this moment to arrive. Word had traveled ahead of him, whispers curling through the corridors and salons, carrying tales of Isabella's endurance and the remarkable children she had raised in exile. The household was abuzz, servants exchanging cautious glances, stewards straightening their posture as if preparing for a confrontation that balanced on the knife edge of propriety and scandal. Every step the Duke took across the marble floors reverberated with the gravity of the task before him, to face not only his family, but the consequences of his compliance in casting Isabella aside, and to confront the undeniable proof of her strength and courage. He entered the main hall, the chandeliers casting fractured light upon the polished floors, and paused to gather his resolve. Isabella was already there, standing near the grand staircase, her posture regal and composed, yet softened by the subtle warmth that had grown in the years of absence. She held the twins' hands, their little fingers intertwined with hers as if claiming her guidance and protection as their own. The children, spirited and aware, glanced up at the Duke with a mixture of curiosity and cautious recognition. The resemblance was undeniable. Their bright eyes mirrored his own, their gestures and expressions a living testament to the love and care Isabella had provided in silence. The Duke's mother, the Duchess, entered at that moment, her expression a mask of dignity worn over thinly veiled astonishment. She had expected a humbled return, perhaps contrition, yet nothing had prepared her for the scene before her. The twins stood confidently, their laughter ringing clear and unrestrained, their presence a challenge to the rigid structure she had so long imposed. Isabella met her gaze with steady poise, neither pleading nor demanding, simply allowing the truth to speak for itself. The Duchess's lips pressed into a thin line, the calculation in her eyes betraying a moment of reconsideration. The authority she wielded was formidable, yet even she could not deny the quiet power of enduring courage. The Duke stepped forward, his voice measured yet carrying a depth of sincerity that could not be ignored. "Mother, I have returned not only as your son but as one who recognizes the consequences of our choices. Lady Isabella has acted with a dignity and foresight that none could have anticipated, and the children she has nurtured are living proof of her devotion and wisdom." The words rang in the hall, clear and deliberate, each syllable a reclamation of responsibility and honor. Isabella's gaze softened, a faint, approving smile touching her lips, acknowledging the Duke's courage in confronting both his family and his own pride. Guests who had gathered in anticipation of scandal or judgment now shifted uncomfortably, their expressions revealing surprise, admiration, and the unspoken realization that the woman they had dismissed had become a force neither decorum nor tradition could contain. The whispers that had once sought to diminish her now carried notes of reverence. "She has endured," one remarked sotto voce, "and with grace unmatched." The Duke's eyes met Isabella's across the hall, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, an understanding forged not merely from words, but from shared experience, struggle, and unshakable respect. Isabella released the twins' hands and stepped closer to the Duke, her movements deliberate, graceful, yet imbued with a quiet authority that could not be challenged. "My lord," she said, her voice calm yet resonant, "I have returned not to seek forgiveness, nor to demand recognition. I have returned to show that life, when nurtured with care and integrity, carries its own weight of truth. The children, our sons, embody that truth." She extended her hands toward him, not in supplication but in invitation, allowing him to witness the living proof of her devotion, of the love that had persisted despite exile and adversity. The Duke knelt slightly, catching the twins' hands with reverent care, his eyes lifting to meet Isabella's with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and the long-suppressed affection that had grown in his absence. "You have shown me a courage I could not have imagined, Isabella," he said softly, his voice trembling with unspoken emotion. "In my pride and folly, I failed to see the strength that resided in you. I am yours to acknowledge, and yet I find that it is I who must be grateful, for you have taught me the measure of patience, endurance, and true devotion." His confession hung in the air, powerful and unadorned, echoing through the grand hall with a resonance that drew every gaze to the exchange, compelling attention not with spectacle, but with the undeniable force of honesty and love. Isabella inclined her head, the faintest trace of a smile curving her lips, a recognition that the reckoning had begun not with words but with presence and unwavering integrity. The Duke rose, standing beside her, his hand brushing against hers with the gentlest of touches, a contact that spoke of shared understanding, respect, and a rekindled connection that had grown stronger in absence than it might have ever been in complacency. The twins, sensing the shift in energy, laughed softly, running to stand between them, their small hands grasping the fingers of both parents. In that moment, the hall seemed to exhale, the tension dissolving into a tableau of unity, hope, and nascent joy. The Duchess, still standing with composed dignity, allowed a fleeting moment of softness to touch her features. She did not speak, yet the acknowledgment in her gaze was unmistakable. The rigid strictures of lineage and expectation had met a force far more enduring, a truth she could neither suppress nor ignore. Society, once poised to judge, now observed in awe as the threads of scandal and propriety intertwined with an unexpected triumph of character and love. As the sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting golden streaks across polished floors and the gleaming forms of those assembled, Isabella and the Duke shared a silent exchange, their eyes holding the promise of reconciliation, understanding, and a love tempered by trials. The children laughed and played, their voices carrying through the hall like music, a living testament to the resilience that had brought them all to this moment. And yet, even as the scene seemed to settle into harmony, a quiet tension lingered, subtle, unspoken, the awareness that society, whispers, and the past could not be so easily silenced, and that their journey, though advanced, still had chapters yet to be written. The Duke turned to Isabella, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, and whispered with a reverence born of years of deferred understanding, "We have much to face together." She met his gaze, steady and unwavering, and allowed the softest hint of a smile to touch her lips, a signal that she was prepared for what was to come, that the past had been endured, and that the future, though uncertain, held promise of love, unity, and the reconciliation of hearts long separated. And as the hall filled with the golden light of late afternoon, the quiet strength of Isabella and the humbled awe of the Duke held the room in a suspended reverence, a moment of reconciliation that felt both complete and anticipatory, leaving all who witnessed it aware that the story was far from finished, that destiny, once shaped by cruelty and exile, now beckoned them toward a new chapter where love, courage, and truth would guide the way. The moment dawn broke over Ashford Manor, the estate seemed to breathe anew, as though the long shadow of judgment and exile had finally lifted. Isabella stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens, the morning sun gilding her hair with strands of gold, her gaze sweeping across the courtyard where the twins chased one another with unbridled laughter. The sound of their joy, innocent yet triumphant, filled the air like music, dissolving remnants of past sorrow and planting seeds of hope that had long been buried beneath the weight of propriety and expectation. Today the manor was alive, not with whispers or scrutiny, but with the pulse of family restored, a quiet symphony of life nurtured through courage and enduring devotion. The Duke joined her, his steps measured yet deliberate, carrying the subdued grace of a man who had learned humility through absence and reflection. His eyes lingered on the children first, admiration and awe mingling with a profound respect for Isabella, who had shaped them into beings of joy, virtue, and spirit. When his gaze shifted to her, he saw not the fragile, chastised bride of years past, but a woman who had endured exile, molded her own destiny, and emerged radiant in dignity and strength. He drew closer, and the faintest touch of his hand against hers carried a language older than words, a silent promise of shared responsibility, devotion, and a rekindled love forged in trials neither could have anticipated. The twins, their faces alight with curiosity, bounded toward them, intertwining their small fingers with their parents' hands. "Father! Mother!" they cried in unison, their voices a chorus of affirmation and belonging. The Duke knelt to meet their eyes, the sunlight catching the fine features that mirrored his own, a living testament to Isabella's unwavering care and the bond that had endured even the harshest scrutiny. Isabella smiled softly, her hand resting on the Duke's shoulder, grounding him in the reality that the children's presence was not merely a proof of love, but a symbol of victory over despair, judgment, and exile. Throughout the morning, the manor slowly came alive with the rhythms of domesticity, a stark contrast to the rigid formality that had once defined it. Servants moved with quiet efficiency, the household now infused with a warmth and ease that spoke of reconciliation and respect. Guests, invited to witness the family's restored harmony, arrived cautiously, their curiosity tempered by awe as they observed Isabella presiding over the morning, her guidance gentle yet firm, her authority unquestioned. The Duke, moving among them with quiet pride, found himself watching Isabella more than he observed the social forms, captivated by the calm strength that had always been hers, now unshielded by fear or societal expectation. Later, as the sun climbed higher, the Duke led Isabella to the manor's drawing room, a space once cold with formality but now warm with the soft light of a spring afternoon. Here he spoke in measured tones, his words carrying the weight of reflection and unspoken apology. "Isabella," he began, voice low but resonant, "I cannot undo the past nor erase the cruelty sanctioned by duty and pride. Yet in witnessing your courage, your patience, and the life you have nurtured, I see what I should have honored from the start. You have taught me that true strength is measured not by title or obedience, but by love, integrity, and endurance." Isabella listened, eyes steady, heart quietly moved, yet she did not reach for immediate reassurance. She allowed the words to settle, to breathe, recognizing in them the depth of change wrought not by apology alone, but by recognition of truth and the tangible proof of devotion that she had carried through exile. "I ask not for praise," she said softly, "nor for words to ease your conscience. What has been done cannot be undone. But what is to come, our family, our children, the life we now share, must be guided by respect, honesty, and the care that has brought us here." Her words were a quiet assertion of authority, a reclamation of agency, and the Duke felt the truth of them like a balm, tempered by the gravity of responsibility he now fully embraced. The children, sensing the shift in energy, moved closer, their small hands brushing against the Duke and Isabella in ways that required no explanation, only presence. Laughter bubbled naturally, filling the room with warmth and a sense of completion that no formal ceremony could convey. Isabella's gaze softened as she watched them, her mind tracing the journey from exile to reunion, the courage it had demanded, and the quiet joy that now radiated from the life she had nurtured in absentia. Each glance, each gesture, spoke of bonds forged in patience and love, stronger than the rigid walls of social expectation. As afternoon waned into a soft amber light, the Duke led Isabella to the garden once more, the twins trailing behind, their small feet leaving fleeting impressions in the dewy grass. Here the world felt infinite, open to possibility and renewal. He took her hands in his voice carrying the quiet gravity of commitment and desire tempered by reverence. "Isabella, if you will allow it, I wish to walk forward together, not as a man reclaiming what was lost, but as one who has learned the measure of patience, endurance, and true devotion. The past has shaped us, yet it shall not define the love we now choose to nurture." Isabella's eyes glimmered, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and the faintest trace of playful challenge. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement that their shared journey was beginning anew, that the scars of judgment and exile had become the foundation of a love fortified by resilience. The twins ran ahead, calling back laughter and questions, their voices stitching the morning and afternoon together in a tapestry of hope, belonging, and the simple, enduring joys of family. The estate, once shadowed by whispers and expectation, now pulsed with life, love, and a quiet triumph over the cruelty of past judgments. Each flower, each blade of grass, seemed to reflect the resilience that Isabella embodied. Each laugh of the children mirrored the promise of continuity, not merely of bloodlines, but of hearts united in understanding, respect, and shared devotion. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across Ashford Manor, Isabella and the Duke stood side by side, hands entwined, gazing upon the children who had become the living proof of love's endurance. In that moment, the past whispered faintly but could not define the present, for the quiet strength of a woman wronged had reshaped the contours of duty, pride, and family. Yet even in this day of triumph, the horizon held untold mysteries, challenges, lessons, and the gentle, unspoken truths of life's unfolding, that promised the journey of love was far from complete. Which topic should our next episode be about? Don't forget to tell us in the comments.